Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well this morning. It's a beautiful Saturday. It's going to be a good weekend. We've got a lot of good stuff again in the Word today, and I'm excited to be on here and growing every day in the Lord, and it's a good thing to serve the Lord, and there's nothing like it, nothing better. And so welcome to the Elizabeth Sharon Ann Bible study. I'm Michelle, and today is Saturday, July 9th, 2022. And we are in Chronicles in the Old Testament. We're in 1 Chronicles 7, and it's talking about the other tribes of Israel. And verses 1 through 5 are the descendants of Issachar, and in 6 through 12, the descendants of Benjamin. And it mentions among the lineage of Benjamin, a man by the name of Ehud, which I hope I pronounced that right. It might be Ehud. This was the famous leader for Israel noted in Judges 3:12 through 30. And the people had cried out to the Lord, and they were under the Moabites were controlling them, and they cried out to the Lord, and he sent a deliverer to them by the name of Ehud. And it said that he was a left-handed man, and he slew the king of Moab. The king's name was Eglon, and then led the Israelites to defeat the Moabites. So, God knew what they had need of. He knew that they needed freedom from the Moabites, and God sent a man to help them. And then it goes on in 7 through 13 to talk about to list the descendants of Naphtali. And then in 14 through 19, it talks about the descendants of the western tribe of Manasseh. And it talks in here about, but Zelophehad begot only daughters. So there was a man who had no sons, and he only had daughters. And he's the one that was mentioned in Numbers when the question came to Moses about female inheritance rights. So when Moses was dividing the land out among the tribes, and here's the scripture. I'm going to read it from Numbers 27, 1 through 11. Then came the daughters of Zelophehad from the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. These were the names of his daughters: Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And they stood before Moses, before Eleazar the priest, and before the leaders and all the congregation, by the doorway of the tabernacle of meeting, saying, Our father died in the wilderness, but he was not in the company of those who gathered together against the Lord, in the company with Korah, but he died in his own sin, and he had no sons. And we know that the land was divided. The birthright generally went to the sons in those days. And so these girls came to Moses, and they asked him, why should the name of our father be removed from among his family because he had no son? Give us a possession among our father's brothers. So Moses brought their case before the Lord. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, The daughters of Zelophehad speak what is right. You shall surely give them a possession of inheritance among their father's brothers, and cause the inheritance of their father to pass to them. So I just think that's awesome how, those girls went to Moses and Moses went before the Lord, and the Lord said, yes, they're right. They, give them their inheritance. And so, and then in verses 20 through 29, the descendants of Ephraim. And so the sons of Ephraim, it says they were famous, or this is a quote by Trapp, they were famous for their wealth, power, and prowess, but withal they are noted for insolent, proud, and quarrelsome. And then in 30 through 40, the descendants of Asher. And so there's a quote by Clark that says, the rabbi, okay, so it says of Asher, their sister, or of the descendants of Asher, their sister Sarah, their sister Shua. And the rabbis say that the daughters of Asher were very beautiful and were all matched with kings or priests. And then we go to 1 Chronicles 8, 1 through 40, talks more on the descendants of Benjamin. And then in verse 40, the sons of Ulam were mighty men of valor, archers. And so archers is in Hebrew that tread the bow for the bows of steel, which these used required great strength to bend them, which therefore they did by treading the bow with their feet and pulling the string with both of their hands. And that's a quote by Poole. And so it's really cool to, to dig in and to, to learn things like that, and, how these men were known and what they did. It's just a really cool part of the history of the Bible. And then in Acts 27, we're in the New Testament. That one is it continues talking about the shipwreck on the way to Rome. So Paul was on the way to Rome, and Paul and his companions leave Caesarea in verses 1 through 2, and 3 through 8. Let's go ahead and read that. The next day, when we docked at Sidon, Julius was very kind to Paul and let him go ashore to visit with friends so they could provide for his needs. So Paul received favor. There's many times in the scriptures that Paul receives favor. And putting out to sea from there, we encountered strong headwinds that made it difficult to keep the ship on course. So we sailed north of Cyprus, between the island and the mainland. Keeping to the open sea, we passed along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, landing at Myra in the province of Lycia. There, the commanding officer found an Egyptian ship from Alexandria that was bound for Italy, and he puts us on board. That's okay. We're going to stop there at verse 6. And so Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. And so the ship first sailed to Sidon, where Paul met with Christians and could receive care from them. The Roman commander gave Paul a lot of liberty because he wasn't a condemned man yet, but waiting for trial before Caesar. Paul's godly character and display of Christian love were also helpful in gaining favor. And an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy. This ship is, was a grain freighter taking grain grown in Egypt to Italy. According to Hughes, the typical grain freighter of that period was 140 feet long and 36 feet wide. It had one mast with a big square sail. And instead of what we think of as a rudder, it steered with 2 paddles on the back part of the ship. They were sturdy, but because of its design, it couldn't sail into the wind. And so then in 9 through 10, Paul's advice to the captain and crew of the ship. We had lost a lot of time. The weather was becoming dangerous for sea travel because it was so late in the fall. And Paul spoke to the ship's officers about it. Men, he said, I believe there is trouble ahead if we go. Shipwreck, loss of cargo, and danger to our lives as well. But the officer in charge of the prisoners listened more to the ship's captain and the owner than to Paul. And since Fair Havens was an exposed harbor, a poor place to spend the winter, most of the crew wanted to go on to Phoenix, farther up the coast of Crete, and spend the winter there. Phoenix was a good harbor with only a southwest and northwest exposure. So Paul had supernatural wisdom and was an experienced traveler on the Mediterranean and had already traveled some 3,500 miles by sea. Knowing the seasons and conditions, Paul advised that they not go on, but they should have listened to him because he was right. And then in 2 Corinthians 11:25 tells us that by this time, Paul had already shipwrecked 3 times. He, like most everyone, knew that sailing in this season was dangerous. So in the fall, that's when that was. And it just was not a wise time to be sailing very far because of, the many storms that could happen, during that time. And the decision was then made to sail on by the vote of the crew to the harbor of Phoenix is where they decided to go. And the port at Phoenix was on the same island of Crete and only about 40 miles away. It didn't seem crazy to them to make it to Phoenix and be spared a miserable winter at Fair Havens. Yet they failed to properly regard the wise word from the Apostle Paul, which turned out to be prophetic. This voyage will end with disaster and much loss. They should have listened to Paul, and later he told them so in Acts 27:21. And then the stormy journey from Fair Havens to Malta. Okay, in 13 through 16. When a light wind began blowing from the south, the sailors thought they could make it. So they pulled up anchor and sailed close to the shore of Crete. But the weather changed abruptly, and a wind of typhoon strength, called a northeasterner, burst across the island and blew us out to sea. The sailors couldn't turn the ship into the wind, so they gave up and let it run before the gale. We sailed along the sheltered side of a small island named Cauda, where with great difficulty we hoisted aboard the lifeboat being towed behind us. So the winds looked favorable, so they set out from Fair Havens. Just beyond Crete, the wind turned dangerous. This wind was feared among ancient sailors for its destructive power. Helpless to navigate with this wind in their face, all they could do is let it run before the gale. And then the measures were taken to save the ship. So they used cables to undergird the ship, and that was a normal emergency measure, helping to prevent the ship from breaking apart in the storm. And then they feared crashing on the Syrtis Sands, and that was an infamous wrecking area of ships off the coast of North Africa. So they went with the wind and gave up hope of navigating the ship in the storm. And then they lightened the ship, so they threw the ship's tackle overboard. These were the final 2 things done to help save the ship. First, throwing over the cargo, and then the ship's equipment. Even with this, the ship continued to drive in the wind for many days. And then in verse 20, The following day, they even took some of the ship's gear and threw it overboard. The terrible storm, okay, here's verse 20 here. The terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars until all hope was gone. And so, they had finally given up, and it tells in Acts 27:37 that there were 276 people on board, both passengers and crew. And it seems like they had finally given up and had no hope of survival. But we'll read in the next couple of chapters, we'll read about how God was merciful to him, to all of them. And then the New Testament reading today is Psalm 7, and it was a Psalm of David. And another psalm where David was crying out to the Lord. He was being he was just being put through a really hard time. And so let's read. I come to you for protection, O Lord my God. Save me from my persecutors. Rescue me. If you don't, they will maul me like a lion, tearing me to pieces with no one to rescue me. O Lord my God, I have done wrong. Or if I have done wrong, or am guilty of injustice, if I have betrayed a friend or plundered my enemy without cause, then let my enemies capture me. Let them trample me into the ground and drag my honor in the dust. Arise, O Lord, in anger. Stand up against the fury of my enemies. Wake up, my God, and bring justice. Gather the nations before you. Rule over them on high. The Lord judges the nations. Declare me righteous, O Lord, for I am innocent, O Most High. End the evil of those who are wicked and defend the righteous. For you look deep within the mind and heart, O righteous God. God is my shield, saving those whose hearts are true and right. I love that so much. I'm going to read that again. It bears repeating. For you look deep within the mind and heart, and he does. You know, there's nothing hidden from God, nothing. He knows our every thought. He knows what we're going to say before we ever even say it. And he is a righteous God. Oh, righteous God. God is my shield, saving those whose hearts are true and right. And, you know, the armor of God, you know, all of the pieces of the armor of God, you know, we have the shield of faith, the sword of the Spirit, you know, all of these things and you know, that guard us. And God has got us, and he's got our back, and he loves us, and he's always fighting for us, and he always wants us to succeed. You know, he knows that there's going to be days that are not fun, that, you know, things are going to come against us, but we just keep holding on to God's unchanging hand, and he will be with us and strengthen us and help us and uphold us with his righteous right hand. God is an honest judge. He is angry with the wicked every day. If a person does not repent, God will sharpen his sword. He will bend and string his bow. He will prepare his deadly weapons and shoot his flaming arrows. The wicked conceive evil. They are pregnant with trouble and give birth to lies. They dig a deep pit to trap others, then fall into it themselves. Well, let's just stop there a minute. They dig a deep pit to trap others. You know, you think about the different times in the Bible that happened. You know, think about the times in the Old Testament that people tried to dig a deep pit for so many of God's people, their enemies tried to dig a deep pit to bury them. And then what happened? Those enemies of God's people, they fell into that deep pit, that trap that they set for the person of God, many times, and so I thank the Lord because he is just. I will sing praise to the name of the Lord Most High, the Lord Most High. He is our strong defense. He is always on our side. And excuse me a second. Okay, and so I was thinking this morning of something that I wanted to just touch on. I was just mentioning how, some days we are going to have a lot of things come against us, and God knows that, and he's with us, and he wants to give us the victory. And in 1 Samuel 30, verse 6, let's see, this is, and this is talking about how David encouraged himself in the Lord. Sometimes we're going to have to do that because, there's going to be days where we just feel like, that we don't have very many friends that are on our side at the time, or, they just don't seem to really encourage us or try to, help us through anything that we're going through. But, God is always with us. He never leaves us. He never forsakes us. He is always just a whisper away, just a breath away. And so in this chapter, 1 Samuel 30, it was talking about David's conflict with the Amalekites. And they had, David and his army had gone out and then they to plunder, and then they came back, or they came to Ziklag on the third day, and they saw that the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag. And anyway, they carried the Amalekites carried off, they burned it with fire. They had taken captive the women and those who were there from small to great. They did not kill anyone, but carried them away and went their way. So David and his men came to the city, and there it was, burned with fire, and their wives, their sons, their daughters had been taken captive. Then David and the people who were with them lifted up their voices and wept until they had no more power to weep. I mean, they were completely broken. They come back, their wives, all their children were gone. They didn't really know, they didn't know what to think, and but now David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and his daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord, his God. So that's what we have to do during those times, is to strengthen ourselves in the Lord, because we're going to have times, we're going to have days that aren't fun, but we have to not give up. We have to remember that it's just temporary. It's not always going to be that way. It will get better, and we can't stay down and just continue looking at the way things are at the moment, because it's just momentary, in the grand scheme of things. Chances are we won't even remember that day, 10, 20, 30 years from now. We have to just focus on God's goodness. He loves us. He wants the best for us. He wants us to be encouraged. And, we need to do, use wisdom and do the things that God would have us to do, to seek him, stay in his word, pray, and get rest. Sometimes we just get exhausted. We can be doing too many things, not saying no enough when opportunities come. It's good to do good things, and to serve the Lord. It's so good. And he gives us the energy and the strength that we need to serve him. But we also need to have a balance and take care of ourselves and, get enough rest and try to eat right and do all these things and to just use wisdom, like I said, and then, have God show us, the things that he would like for us to do, and his hand will be upon those things that he wants us to do. And there's going to be times when we are criticized for doing good. That's going to happen. And I ran across a quote. I'm going to pull it up on my phone that has to do with that, with criticism. Don't be discouraged by criticism. It usually just means that you are making a difference. Criticism is the price of influence. Remember that critics never change the world, but the ones being criticized often do. That's a quote by Dave Willis. And I just thought, that's true. And it's encouraging, because people will criticize us sometimes, but, we just have to overlook it and walk in love, stay strong, keep a good witness for the Lord, keep our lips zipped when we'd rather respond in retaliation, and just know the Lord, he takes care of everything, and he will reward us when we are being persecuted, and when people give us a hard time, and he sees and he knows, and he's on our side always. And so that brings us to the close of today's Bible study. And thank you for joining us today. And we just continue praying for Elizabeth. We love her, and we just want her to do better every single day. I know that she's looking forward to being able to come back on here and encourage us. She's such an encourager, and she's a blessing. And so anyway, I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their weekend, and stay awesome. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.